the first thing your eyes will lock onto isn't the family. It's the mirror. Because the moment you look closely, really look, you'll realize that the reflection in that antique wooden frame doesn't match the people sitting in front of it. The mother's face is turned to the left in the photo, but in the mirror, she's staring directly at the camera with eyes that look unnervingly hollow, as if she's frozen in a moment she wasn't supposed to exist in. And once you notice that single impossible detail, the entire picture begins to unravel, one unsettling layer at a time, transforming a simple 1904 family portrait into one of the strangest photographic anomalies ever recorded. At first glance, the photograph is textbook early 1900s domestic life, a mother in a stiff high-collar dress, a father with immaculate grooming and a rigid posture, and two children arranged perfectly to fit the era's obsession with disciplined composure. The background is plain, the lighting natural, the camera quality typical of a glass plate negative from that period. Everything aligns with what you would expect, until the reflection in the mirror destroys every sense of normalcy. Because while the father and children appear correctly reflected, the mother's mirrored expression is shifted, subtly, but unmistakably, into a gaze directed toward the viewer, even though her actual head is angled away. It's not a trick of shadow or aging. It's deliberate. It's wrong. And it's impossible. Investigating the original print reveals even more anomalies. The children's reflections appear slightly delayed, almost like their mirrored faces were captured a fraction of a second after their real ones, something early shutter mechanisms were incapable of producing. Their reflections aren't exact duplicates, tiny differences in eye direction and mouth tension suggest two separate moments captured within what should have been a single exposure. And then there's the father, his reflection is perfectly still, too still. The real him appears mid-breath, shoulders slightly rising as if holding a pose, but the reflection remains rigid and lifeless, almost mannequin-like in comparison. The disconnect is subtle, but once seen, it can't be unseen. This single photograph became an obsession for historians, early photography experts, and even paranormal researchers, all scrambling to understand how one 1904 portrait managed to break rules the technology physically couldn't bend. The equipment used during that era produced direct, unforgiving duplicates. There was no double exposure, no chance of a delayed reflection, no ability for a mirror to capture a different emotional state than the subject displayed. Early mirrors themselves were made with silver nitrate backed by sturdy oak panels, material that reflected light faithfully, without distortion. So why does the mother's reflection behave as if it has a mind of its own? Why do the children appear in two slightly different moments? And why does the father's mirrored face lack the tiny imperfections that make a reflection look alive? The deeper you study the image, the more unnatural it becomes. The mirror seems to be the only part of the photograph untouched by time. The wood has aged, the photo edges have yellowed, the children's clothing shows typical cellulose breakdown, but the mirror surface remains eerily pristine. No scratches. No tarnish. No signs of chemical decay. It reflects like it was manufactured yesterday, not over a century ago. Forensic review of the plate negative revealed something even stranger. The mirror portion of the photo has slightly sharper resolution than the rest of the image, as if the camera prioritized what was inside the mirror over the subjects themselves. Early cameras weren't capable of depth-selective sharpness. And yet, somehow, the mirror is captured with unnatural clarity. The most disturbing detail of all, however, lies in the position of the mother's eyes. When overlaying the real mother's face with her reflection, the alignment breaks. Her reflection has slightly wider eyes, a different focus, and an expression tinged with fear. It isn't the same moment. It isn't the same face. It may not even be the same woman. To understand how this photograph was taken, we have to break down the setting. The chair the mother sits in is carved from black walnut, consistent with 1900s rural craftsmanship. The children's boots have brass eyelets popular in Midwestern towns at that time. The wallpaper behind them, faded stripes with hand-stenciled borders, places the home in an upper-middle-class neighborhood. Everything in the environment matches the era perfectly. Everything except the behavior of the mirror. Historical documentation shows the family had ordered the portrait from a traveling photographer, normal for the time, but something about this photographer stands out. His name appears in only a handful of records, and each time, his clients described him as unusual, quiet, obsessive, or fixated on reflections. Some families even refused to let him into their homes after he insisted on including mirrors in every shot. One surviving letter from a client reads, "He became irritated when we suggested the mirror was unnecessary. He said it was the only way to see the truth inside the frame." Whatever that meant. And this leads us back to the 1904 family. Because after this photograph was taken, the family's life took a turn that aligns too perfectly with the anomalies in the reflection. Within a year, the mother reportedly began suffering from sudden bouts of staring into mirrors for hours at a time, claiming she could see someone else trying to look back. The children had recurring nightmares of people moving behind the glass, and the father tried covering every reflective surface in the house. Local archives contain a newspaper clipping referencing the family experiencing disturbances, though details were vague and softened by the era's modest writing style. The mother's mental decline progressed quickly, leading to her being committed to a treatment facility where she insisted, until her final days, that her reflection wasn't hers. But here's where things become truly unsettling. After the family vanished from public record, the photographer also disappeared. His equipment was found abandoned near a riverbank miles away, including several glass negatives of other families with similar mirror inconsistencies. Not as dramatic as the 1904 portrait, but all showing slight deviations in reflections. A turned head here. A mismatched expression there. It was as if he had spent years trying to capture a moment hidden beneath the surface of reality, and this family photo was the closest he ever came to revealing whatever he believed was inside the frame. Some researchers believe the mirror anomaly is tied to the photographer's experimental techniques. Others argue it indicates an early attempt at double-layer exposure, something unknown at the time. And then there are those who think it captured a genuine moment of dissociation between a person and their reflection, a phenomenon recorded in various cultures but never visually documented. Whatever the explanation, the effect is chilling, a mirror that reflects not the subject, but something else. Something observing. Something aware. Modern forensic scanning of the image uncovered micro-scratches around the mirror frame, as if someone had tried removing or altering that portion of the photograph decades ago. Chemical analysis showed that the emulsion beneath the mirror area is slightly different from the rest of the image, as though the photographer used an experimental chemical mixture for that section alone. Yet no known process from that time could selectively treat part of a glass plate negative. Scientists attempted to replicate the effect using modern means, controlled distortions, exposure blending, layered prints, but every attempt failed to produce the same eerie misalignment seen in the original. The photograph remains an unsolved anomaly, one that has baffled image experts for over a century. The most terrifying possibility, though, emerges from testimonies of those who have viewed the photo in person. Several reported feeling watched, not by the family in the picture, but by the mother's reflection. One archivist claimed the reflection seemed slightly different each time he examined it. Another insisted that the children's mirrored faces subtly shifted direction over repeated viewings, though this remains unverified. And yet, the rumor persists, the mirror in the photo doesn't just reflect. It responds. By the time researchers reached the deeper layers of the glass plate negative, one thing became clear: whatever happened during the creation of this photograph did not come from a flaw, a scratch, or age. It was intentional. And the closer they looked, the more disturbing the intention appeared to be. The mirror, which should have been nothing more than a passive reflector of light, seemed to function like a second lens, a silent observer capturing something beyond the family seated in front of it. As if it had recorded a version of them separated by more than just a physical angle, but by time, emotion, or an unseen presence. The mother's altered gaze, the differently timed reflections of the children, and the frozen rigidity of the father, these weren't accidental distortions. They were signatures of a process nobody in 1904 should have known how to produce. For over a century, the photograph remained locked in a museum archive box, catalogued, preserved, and occasionally studied. But in 1998, during a high-resolution scanning project, something unexpected happened. The technician responsible for digitizing thousands of old photographs stopped halfway through the process, unsettled by a detail in the scan that did not appear in the physical print. On the digital image, only visible when enhanced to extreme contrast, the mirrored version of the mother had faint markings around her mouth, as if whispering something. Not an expression, not noise, but shapes. The form of words. The archivists dismissed it as a digital artifact, an accidental enhancement created by aggressive sharpening algorithms. But later analysis revealed that the markings were not random. They were too structured, too rhythmic, too deliberate. They resembled the shapes of phonetic formation, tiny micro-expressions formed at the moment someone begins to speak. To test the idea, researchers isolated the mirror portion, removed luminance noise, and overlaid successive contrast passes. The result chilled everyone in the room. Her reflection was forming the beginning of a sentence, frozen mid-breath. The real mother, of course, displayed no such action. Her lips were closed, fixed in the stiff composure typical of early portrait etiquette. But in the mirror, she was trying to say something. Theories erupted. Some believed it indicated a subtle double exposure. Others argued it revealed evidence of manipulation by the photographer. But once again, every hypothesis collided with the same immovable truth. No known photographic technique from 1904 could create inconsistent microexpressions within a reflection without altering the main subject. The mother's face appeared calm, statuesque. Her mirrored self appeared caught in a moment of fear, frozen as if pleading to be heard. To make sense of it, historians began examining the photographer, known only as Elias Gray. His existence was a thin paper trail made of rumors, mistranslated census entries, and fading signatures in archives. Every surviving note about him described a man obsessed, unhealthy in his fixation with capturing what the eye cannot see. Some accounts suggested he carried a journal where he documented experiments involving mirrors, reflections, and something he called temporal echoes, though the journal has never been found. There were mentions of long nights spent alone in his portable darkroom, whispering to himself, listening to what he believed were sounds within his negatives. Whether these stories were exaggerations or truth remains unclear. But one thing is certain, Gray was not a typical photographer. One surviving letter, written by a client who refused his services after a tense encounter, reads: "He seemed disappointed when I asked not to involve the mirror. He insisted the mirror revealed what we conceal. He said the real image is never the one we offer the world, but the one we cannot control." The family in the 1904 photograph had not objected. They allowed him complete freedom during the session, unaware that they were stepping into the most disturbing piece of his legacy. After Gray disappeared in 1907, local newspapers speculated wildly. Some claimed he drowned. Some believed he abandoned the country. Others insisted he succumbed to a mental breakdown similar to the mother in the photograph. But the strangest account came from a fisherman who claimed to have seen Gray wandering near the riverbank days before his disappearance. He described the photographer standing knee-deep in the water, staring into the surface as if it were a window rather than a reflection. The fisherman overheard him muttering, "It isn't them. It's the ones behind them. They're watching through us." Whether the man suffered delusions or discovered something genuinely inexplicable remains impossible to determine. But what happened next is documented. When authorities found his abandoned equipment, several glass negatives were smashed, as if intentionally destroyed. But 6 negatives survived, wrapped in oilcloth, protected from moisture. Each contained a portrait featuring a mirror. And each displayed irregularities similar to the 1904 family photo, subtle misalignments in the reflections, expressions that didn't match, and eyes that stared in directions the subjects themselves were not facing. What set the family portrait apart was its severity. The mother's expression. The children's asynchronous reflections. The father's unnatural stillness. And, of course, the mirror's pristine clarity. Unlike the other photographs, the 1904 mirror seemed immune to time. Some experts even suggested it reflected more contrast than the camera should have been able to capture, almost as if it emitted detail rather than receiving it. This impossible characteristic sparked one of the most controversial theories among investigators, that the mirror in the photograph is not actually a mirror at all, but a lens. A portal. A transparent surface revealing something hidden, captured by accident or intention. But the story takes a darker turn when we look at the fate of the family. Shortly after the portrait was taken, the mother's mental state unraveled rapidly. Her medical records, though scarce, detail episodes where she insisted her reflection belonged to someone else, someone trying to replace her. She complained of seeing her mirrored self move independently, smiling when she was not, blinking a fraction late, staring with unfamiliar intensity. Family members reported covering the mirrors, yet the mother still claimed to see her, as if the reflection followed her even without the aid of glass. The children's nightmares grew more frequent. They described figures standing behind them in the mirror, figures with their faces but not their movements. One of the children reportedly refused to be near reflective surfaces for the rest of his short life, dying at age 17 under circumstances never fully recorded. The father, burdened by the unraveling of his family, sought help from various doctors, religious leaders, and traveling healers, none of whom could offer explanations beyond stress, hysteria, or imagination. The family eventually moved, their trail ending abruptly in 1911 with no further documentation. But the photograph remained. It resurfaced decades later in an auction house, misidentified as a typical early portrait, until a buyer noticed the reflection and alerted historians. Since then, it has been studied extensively, yet its anomalies remain unsolved. The most recent investigation occurred in 2019 when researchers used multispectral imaging to analyze the negative. This technique allows experts to detect layers, edits, and hidden details invisible to the human eye. They discovered something startling. Beneath the mother's reflection, beneath the emulsion itself, was a faint outline of another face. Not hers. Someone older. Someone hollow-eyed. Someone whose features suggested they weren't living at the time of the photograph. The outline existed at a different angle than the reflection should have captured, as if standing behind the mirror rather than in front of it. It was not visible in visible light scans, only in infrared. Infrared imaging also revealed smudged fingerprints on the interior side of the mirror frame, something physically impossible to access after the print was sealed. These prints did not match anyone known from the family or the photographer's circle. Their presence implies either a bizarre contamination event, or that the mirror contained layers not yet understood by modern science. The most unsettling discovery emerged during a final enhancement pass. Researchers digitally reconstructed the mother's mirrored lips using phoneme recognition software. The microshapes formed two distinct syllables, both matching a single English word. Look. This is where the story leaves us, on the edge of a truth we are not prepared to understand. A truth that might explain the mother's breakdown, the children's nightmares, the father's desperation, and the photographer's disappearance. Something inside the mirror was demanding attention. Something saw them when the camera opened its shutter. Something used the reflection as its voice. And now, more than a century later, every time the image is scanned, examined, or displayed, people report a similar feeling, that the mother's mirrored eyes aren't just staring at the camera, but directly at them. Observing. Waiting. Expecting the viewer to finally realize what she tried to warn in that frozen instant. Look. But at what? The family behind her. The faint outline in the glass. The photographer's intention. Or something else, waiting behind every reflection, unnoticed until a single mistake in 1904 exposed it? Whatever the truth may be, experts agree on one thing: this photograph should not exist, not in the way it does. Not with details that no camera of its era could possibly capture. Not with warnings hidden in the lips of a reflection. Not with a mirror that refuses to age. And if the mother was right, if the reflection wasn't hers, then we are not looking at a family portrait. We are looking at a moment of intrusion. A moment when something behind the glass looked back, and got caught.